So good to see you. And I wish it was under better times, as I'm sure you do as well. I was at an event recently here in New York where it was a celebration of 80 years ago, the war against fascism, the war of Chinese resistance against Japanese aggression. And out of all of that is born the United Nations. Obviously, you and I were not alive when that happened, but we've lived through a life where the UN is there. How would you describe the accomplishments of this organization?
We are built on the notion that states are better off when they talk to each other, when they negotiate, and when they agree on common rules and standards. The economy functions better, people's rights are better protected, and people's options increase to define and control their own lives. This is why the UN exists. It is meant to make us better, but to also make the world better for us to thrive, for our children to have good jobs in the future, to be able to define how they want to live and how they want to grow. This is the UN. It's about a better world, and it will be better if states continue to favor dialogue, favor negotiations, favor peaceful means of exchange to using might and violence. The underpinning is normative. The underpinning is the UN Charter. The underpinning is a normative space within which this dialogue can take place, because all states in the world ratified this UN Charter because they agree on the principles and frameworks that are contained therein. And we need to protect this, because we haven't invented anything better to support peace and stability in the world. I haven't seen a better model. You can criticize this one, but I haven't seen a better invention in that sense.
So criticize this one, and there is a great deal of criticism. I mean, I think some people would say perhaps there's more lecturing than listening when it comes to the UN, posturing, blocks. Where would you like to see it go if it were to change?
I want the UN first and foremost to preserve its role as the fundamental, as the primary multilateral platform in the world, one that contains all states, that comprises each individual state in the General Assembly with one vote, with an equal vote. This is something that we need to preserve, because there's no other place in the world where states come together. They may not like what they see, they may not like what they hear, but they come together and they talk to each other. And we cannot underestimate the value of having this one space where everybody has a voice. Everybody can take the floor and express the position of their government. And, of course, it's not always efficient. It's a big institution, and we always have to make an effort to keep this institution as lean and impactful as it can be. That's a managerial responsibility. Senior managers have that task on an ongoing basis. You reform yourself constantly because the world changes constantly. There is a digital transformation happening. We need to adapt to it. It's not a one-off reform that we are talking about. This organization has to be led by people who constantly have in the back of their mind that the operational side of the house has to function optimally so that the political side has the space. And it won't happen if we grow out of proportion, including us at the ICSC. We have to remain efficient, and we have to know where we put our money, and we have to remain accountable to our funders about how we spend the money. That's our responsibility. But our mandate will only remain if states agree to continue to adhere to the UN Charter and, in our case, the Geneva Conventions, which equally all states have ratified, because they contain the principles for human and for state interaction that is peaceful.
I want to ask you about China's contribution. They've been a permanent member of the UN Security Council. They've been involved in peacekeeping, development, global governance. What's your sense of their contributions?
China is a powerful state. China is a global player. China is a huge country with enormous, potentials and enormous capabilities. And China is a permanent member of the UN Security Council, based on how the UN was created coming out of the Second World War. So, of course, China has an even bigger responsibility to make sure that this institution fulfills its role and that this institution remains functional. This responsibility, in my opinion, grows with the might that you bring to the table. And certainly the permanent members of the Security Council have a heightened responsibility to do the right thing.
Let me just throw some words at you and just get your thoughts. And I know there are a lot of them up there. We had a chance to visit a little bit before the conversation here. Gaza.
Surpasses anything that you would consider humane, legally acceptable, or in the logic of military objectives. We have to reverse what's happening in Gaza. I meet the families of the hostages. They need to come home. But I see the civilians. I go to Gaza myself. I see the abhorrent suffering of the children, of the civilians in Gaza that are squeezed in a tiny little territory where there's only rubble, where they find no security, and where they are just exposed and stripped of their human dignity entirely. And we cannot continue watching this. It's going to break our souls. It's going to haunt us. We have to stop this. We need a ceasefire in Gaza.
I remember the image, and I'm sure you've seen it too, the little boy picking up sand, and so this is what we have to eat. I mean, talk to us about what we're seeing, the difficulties of getting aid to the people there, just some of the complexities that people may not be aware of.
Look, aid is available in abundance on the other side, which is barely a mile away. Aid is there. It's not difficult to bring in aid when there's a political will to enable that. And when there is a political will to make sure that this aid reaches those who need it. And people who need aid the most are those who are elderly, those who are, physically disabled, those who are hurt, those who are weak or sick. We need to bring the aid to them. We need to be able to distribute it according to humanitarian criteria. Aid is not something that you drop in a place and leave it to the fittest to get or to grab. That's not the point. The strongest will then get the aid that probably need it less than the weakest, and certainly may need it less than the children that cannot defend themselves, never, because they are always weaker than the others.
Walking over here, you walked by what I did as well, the Flame of Hope statue erected to commemorate the genocide in 1994 of the Tutsi people in Rwanda. And I thought a lot about it as I was walking over here, is that, here we are. How do we as a people allow what's going on in Gaza to continue? Are we numb? What's happened?
It's something that I think about very often. I visited Rwanda earlier this year. I saw the memorial, I saw the exhibition, I saw the pictures, and I was walked again through the history of what happened. And I cannot comprehend why humankind, with all the technology that we have, with all the archives that we have, including our archive at the International Committee of the Red Cross, are not capable of learning the lesson. Nobody wins by committing atrocities. Nobody gets a benefit out of this. Everybody suffers if that happens. There are no winners in a total war. Never. History has proven that. But you sow the seeds for future atrocities if you commit them And if you continue watching how they continue, if there's no effort to stop it, no genuine effort to stop it and to reverse it by those who have an influence and who legitimately are in a position to reverse.
Ukraine.
Ukraine is a war of attrition. There are close to 150,000 missing people that we have in our, in our system that we are trying to find. There are, in 150,000 cases, families that have contacted us because they don't know where the sons are, the daughters are, their relatives are. I'm using this example to show you how massive the human loss is in this war. We cannot neglect the fact that there's so many individuals, so many humans that have lost their lives already. And there's no indication at the moment that this will end. And how long will this continue? It's a war that is happening under international watch, just like Gaza, and a little bit less Sudan, unfortunately, even though Sudan deserves equal attention. But we are watching this, and it's tens of thousands of people that are being sacrificed. I see this from a humanitarian perspective. I'm not in charge of politics, but the politicians should, reflect on this and say, okay, maybe it's better if you come to the negotiation table and take this seriously, because that's the only way of stopping this, stopping the bleeding of our own people, and they're bleeding on both sides.
You mentioned Sudan. It doesn't get as much attention. What are your thoughts there?
Sudan is the biggest humanitarian tragedy at the moment in terms of size. Millions displaced, hundreds of thousands of people who don't have access to food and medicine, and abhorrent things that are being done to civilians. I visited Sudan last year. I visited the border of Sudan 2 years ago. There was not a woman that didn't tell me of what had happened to her. I mean, those who conduct hostilities have to instruct their forces, no matter whether it's state or non-state actors. They have to instruct their forces not to rape women, not to kill children, not to deny food, water, and the essentials, especially healthcare, to the civilian populations. The war is bad enough as it is, but you cannot have limitless wars. Not everything is allowed in a war. We don't prevent wars, but we call on states and we call on non-state armed groups involved in hostilities to respect the rules that were designed and ratified by all states to prevent the worst. And raping a woman is the worst. Killing a child is the worst. It's never allowed.
You mentioned the Geneva Conventions, and one of the concerns I've heard you raise is just the blatant disregard of the Geneva Conventions. So we're seeing that on the world stage, are we not?
I want to come back to Gaza. The law is violated. And I'm in a position to have to say the law shouldn't be violated because it's our mandate. We are the guardians of the laws. But what is more important looking at Gaza today is the fact that we are becoming dismissive about the law. That the parties to a conflict don't even deny anymore that there's something like a legal obligation that they have to follow at all times. It's putting the law aside and saying we need total victory and everything is allowed in the pursuit of that victory. Even the instrumentalization of food for military means. That is the most dangerous part, because if states accept that the laws that fundamentally protect their own people are hollowed out, It is a question of time until their own people find themselves in a situation where those putting them under pressure will say, there are no rules, sorry, anything is allowed. It's a very dangerous development that we have to reverse. And there is an initiative that we launched with 6 states last year that is by now supported by 90 states that tries to elevate the significant role that the rules of war play today and will have to continue to play to the political level, because we need the political leaders to acknowledge that what is happening at the moment in the different sides of conflict is a danger to their own population.
You have a lot of people who are watching this who are justly concerned about these conflicts that are occurring around the world, but they, in many respects, I think they feel kind of frozen in place, numb, don't know what to do. What would you say to our viewers about that?
Everybody can support change if a situation is bad, just by how you approach it, how you think about it, and how you talk about it. Dehumanization is one of the biggest threats at the moment, because if you allow dehumanizing language to spread, it becomes a reality. We see this on the battleground. And it's an individual responsibility. But the political leaders have a much, much bigger role to play. It is their responsibility to employ all the means that they have, all the influence that they have to stop wars and to end wars and to end the suffering. It's not about denouncing your enemy. It's about calling your ally and telling your ally behind closed doors that you don't accept what is happening and that you will use your political, your economic, and your diplomatic power to influence and end to the suffering that is happening.
Is it
It's a collective responsibility of all states to ensure that the law is respected.
But is enough of that happening?
No, it's not enough. And currently, there's a numbness that is utterly irresponsible. You are a state leader because you were elected to protect the interests of your own people. The interests of your own people are not protected if you tolerate atrocities, even if they happen on the other side of the world, because the world is interconnected. The world is informed by what is happening elsewhere. If you tolerate it here, it's a question of time until it comes to your doorstep. States have to stand up. And China is one of the countries that launched this global initiative with us to uphold humanity in war. And I think it hasn't been more important since the creation of the UN and since the creation of the Geneva Conventions in 1949. It's an exceptional measure, but we took this measure because what we see is a constant escalation of conflicts, 130. Twice as many as 15 years ago, but also an escalation in the intensity of warfare that is overlayered by a permissiveness with regards to the rules of war that creates suffering at the level that we cannot cope with anymore because it just greatly surpasses our capacity to help.
Talked about the interconnected quality of the world we live in today, talking about climate change. And we're seeing more and more evidence that it's going to impact the landscape. There's going to be climate refugees, which are going to create additional pressures, which may actually increase the amount of conflicts we see. As you look to the future, what are your concerns about it?
Look, I joined the ICRC coming from the UN Development Program, where I worked a lot on climate change-related issues, on green transition, on social and economic development. It's an important dimension that overlaps to a certain degree with what we do as humanitarians. But I can tell you, based on my long experience in the multilateral field and in the field of international cooperation, the first steps to peace are always very practical. They are very concrete. It starts with giving people food, by providing safe passage for them, by agreeing on the exchanges of detainees. And then progressively, moving towards recovery and reconstruction. It's not complicated. We make it sound complicated, but on the ground for the people, it's very straightforward. They need water, they need food, they need safety, they need electricity, they need health. And then you expand it from there. All that you see in terms of impact that climate change has on the ground is just aggravating the impossibility for so many people in so many places to access water and to access food and to harvest their land. And of course, we have to be aware of all these different implications. But today, given the proliferation of war, we have to first and foremost invest in stopping the killing. No climate action will be impactful if the killing continues at the levels that we see in parts of Africa and across the Middle East. And both regions, Eastern Africa and the Middle East, are on a knife's edge. It can escalate tomorrow and escalate at levels that won't be able to be controlled anymore. And then all the debates that you have around climate action will become secondary because you will just not be able to move at all. So yes, climate is important. We have to do it now, but we have to invest in peace. And I'm telling you this as somebody who has worked in development for many years and who takes this very seriously.
Let me ask one final question. You've been very gracious with your time. I think sitting here listening to you and the people watching this will say this is a dose of reality, what's happening on the ground. But can you give us a dose of hope, which has to get you up each day and kind of drive you? Where do you find the hope?
I do have days where I find it difficult to get up and difficult to repeat what I feel I'm repeating too often and is not being heard, not enough. But then every day there's also a message from somewhere where we are working, from some delegation around the globe, because we are in 100 different situations, that reports on something positive, a breakthrough, a reunification of a family with their children or their relatives. There's always something positive in our mailbox that compensates and that keeps our colleagues motivated to continue, because many of them risk their lives and the hardship in the places where we work is considerable. There's no distraction from the war in many places where they operate. But the fact that they can help, and the fact that the rules of war are respected, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to help in so many cases. We have 18,000 staff. It's positive. So there is humanity. We just have to make sure it doesn't disappear. We have to make sure it's being kept alive. And we have to make sure it's not being treated as something that we can live without. We are not humans if we don't exercise empathy and if we don't strive for peace, because that's our inherent initial, notion, our DNA. I am convinced that at core, humans want to have peace because they know subconsciously that their chances to survive will always be bigger, higher, if there's peace. And peace will not be possible if we leave the normative space within which we agree how to live together. You stand in line to get on the bus. You could bully yourself into the bus, and everybody else could do this. You intuitively stand in line because you know you will get on the bus better, safer, and faster. If everybody started bullying, even if there's no law that you have to comply with, the buses would stop running because nobody would take the risk. Now, this is the situation you find in Gaza. You create a lawless space to a degree where you can't bring in trucks anymore because they're being looted. That's why we need the rules of war. because they are most essential to protect life and to enable assistance and to preserve the space for a return to normalcy. If you dismantle that normative space, if you dismantle all respect for the rules, the common rules, you risk not being able to come back.
I can't thank you enough. It's been very enlightening. I appreciate the work you're doing. I know it's different.
Thank you. Thanks.